Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast series focusing on critical business decisions. Brought to you by Brady Ware & Company. Brady Ware is a regional, full-service accounting and advisory firm that helps businesses and entrepreneurs make visions a reality.
Welcome to Decision Vision, a podcast giving you, the listener, clear vision to make great decisions. In each episode, we discuss the process of decision-making on a different topic from the business owner's or executive's perspective. We aren't necessarily telling you what to do, but we can put you in a position to make an informed decision on your own and understand when you might need help along the way. My name is Mike Blake, and I'm your host for today's program. I'm a director at Brady Ware & Company, a full-service accounting firm based in Dayton, Ohio, with offices in Dayton, Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Indiana, and Alpharetta, Georgia. My practice specializes in providing fact-based strategic and risk management advice to clients that are buying, selling, or growing the value of companies and their intellectual property. Brady Ware is sponsoring this podcast, which is being recorded in Atlanta for social distancing protocols. If you'd like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and at Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast aggregator, and please consider leaving a review of the podcast as well. So, with this podcast, we're taking a little bit of a different take on decision vision. The overwhelming majority of the Decision Vision podcast topics are framed as a binary, should I do X or should I not do X, or should I do X versus should I do Y? And some time ago, in an idle moment, it occurred to me that that's not the only kind of decision that you, the audience, are faced with. You may make a decision to proceed, but then there's another kind of decision where you then must select, right? You make a decision that, yes, I'm going to eat out. You arrive at the restaurant, and then you are generally presented with a menu, although now I guess a lot of them give you a QR code and you have to squint on your phone, which I hate, and I hope that goes away. But I'm going to kind of test out a series of these topics because I do think there's some value to them for that, what I call sort of a second order decision. We've decided to do X, how do we proceed? Because that how do we proceed typically involves, again, a choice among various alternatives of how to proceed. And so today's podcast topic is actually sort of going back to the future, if you will, and you'll understand why in a second as I introduce our guests. But today's topic is how do I select an attorney? And most of us at some point in our lives are going to have interactions with and rely upon the advice provided by a legal counsel. And that advice may be in a transaction, may be in contract law, employment law, intellectual property law. You name it, there's a law out there, and there's an attorney out there who wants to be your advisor and provide that advice. And it occurs to me that it's not all that easy to select an attorney, not for lack of them. There's certainly an ample supply of attorneys in the United States who are, again, happy to become your advisor and counselor. But you can be overwhelmed with those choices, right? And unless you kind of have a legal background or you hang out in the legal community, how do you make an informed decision as to the right person or the right firm or some combination of the two to represent you? And, because attorneys provide such critical advice, it's important that that's a decision that you make correctly, because bad advice or a bad relationship with an attorney that causes you maybe to not listen to their advice, not act on their advice, can undermine what might have been a good decision to retain legal counsel in the first place. So we're having sort of a panel discussion today, or a tag team, if you will. And we have two guests today, both of whom are alumni of the Decision Vision podcast. In no particular order other than looking at them on the screen. First is Juliana Neelbauer, who is Senior Associate at Eckl Farnham, which is a law firm here in Atlanta. They're a full-service law firm that offers deep litigation expertise, strategic, corporate, and transactional counsel, practical legal advice to companies, individuals, and families. Juliana focuses her practice on virtual general counsel for-profit, nonprofit, charitable, trade organizations, and high net worth individuals and families, which hail from consumer technology, commercial technology, healthcare, industrial supply chain, boy, that's a mess, finance, government contracting, and political action industries. Also joining me today, talking about Back to the Future, is the host / victim from the inaugural podcast, right? Think back to like Star Trek when they had Christopher Pike as the captain. Jackie Hutter was the first guest ever on the podcast to talk about should I get a patent, and incredibly enough, she's agreed to come back on. And Jackie has been helping innovators capture the value of their ventures at the Hutter Group since 2008. During this time, and probably not coincidentally, Jackie has been named by her peers as a top global IP strategist for I don't know how many years now. It's been, I don't know, it's got to be at least a decade. Every time I open up LinkedIn, she's named like another top IP something or other. For several years, Jackie took a break from the law as CEO of a startup technology company where she experienced entrepreneurship from the inside, which gives her a unique perspective among patent experts. Prior to striking out on her own, Jackie was a senior intellectual property lawyer at Georgia Pacific and a shareholder at an Atlanta intellectual property law firm. She started her non-legal career as a research scientist in the innovation group of a hair and skin product company. She lives in the Decatur area in a groovy mid-century house with her husband, far too many pets, and we may hear one of the dogs barking in the background today for no extra charge. And she has 2 daughters in college. Juliana and Jackie, welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
So here's a question I want to jump in, and we could almost talk an hour on this one topic, but we'll just sort of see how this goes. My question is, how do people end up with bad lawyers, or at least lawyers that are a bad fit for them, right? There's, as I said, there's no shortage of lawyers out there. There's no shortage of information you can find out about them, whether they want it to be found out or not. But nevertheless, we all encounter scenarios in which we have clients, contacts, friends that are frankly unhappy with their legal counsel. And sometimes they feel trapped in that relationship. How, in your mind, seeing it from the semi-inside, how does that happen?
Well, I thought about this on the way to drop my daughter's really awful car at the car mechanic this morning. And the reason why people end up with bad lawyers is the same reason why so many people end up with bad mechanics. They just don't know what they're looking for. And usually, the good news is it doesn't really matter because it's a pretty simple thing. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill. It takes some skill, takes some expertise, but it doesn't take a whole lot of expertise. But in the case of my auto mechanic, who I adore, by the way, I learned about him from a very dear friend who was himself a car mechanic, and he doesn't fix his own cars anymore. And he happened upon this gentleman's business. But importantly, my good friend who introduced me to this car mechanic collects vintage cars. He has a Jensen, and he doesn't take his Jensen to our car mechanic because he knows that our car mechanic is not qualified to fix a Jensen. And my point there is that sometimes you need a skill set that is really, really hard to find. And you're not, not only do you not know what the general skill set is for something, but again, it won't matter. But if you need something very, very specialized, and you don't know, and you're likely not going to know, you're not going to know whether the guy on the other side of the counter knows how to fix that or not, because it's probably pretty likely that they're going to say, "Oh yeah, I can fix this." And when you end up with a Jensen, if you will, that's currently worth $100,000, and then they screw up the wiring on that, and it's not worth $100,000 anymore, you're going to be pretty upset. But the damage done been did, right?
Right.
I think it's just the nature of the specialty, right? You could talk about that with any number of other specialties. Doctors, right? You sometimes you just have a broken bone and it's pretty easy, but sometimes it's something more serious, and you hope and you expect you should expect that the doctor, he or she is going to recognize that they are really qualified to do what needs to be done, but a lot of times they don't.
So in your case, you benefited in your mechanic story. You benefited from the adage that if you want to catch a jewel thief, hire a jewel thief, right?
I like that one, yes.
And actually, I'm going to come back to that because I do think there are resources that at least purport to sort of be that hire a jewel thief to catch a jewel thief. We'll get there. Juliana, anything that you want to add to that discussion?
Of course, I have something I want to add to that. I'm a lawyer. I love to talk, but also because, quite frankly, the reason why I am sitting in this seat and in this role in life, the reason why I went back to law school was because I personally felt this pain of how do you find the right lawyer and then having a lawyer that you're not really happy with. And after having that experience in my own businesses, I regretfully shared it with some other technology company owners and discovered, I shouldn't be embarrassed about this. We're all suffering this fate, or a large number of us are. And I thought at the time, well, this is just, a market inefficiency or a gap that needs to be filled. And so perhaps foolishly, I left the tech industry and went back to law school and put up a shingle and started serving my management consulting clients with legal services as an attorney in my own firm. And so, and I'm still doing it. So I guess it's a good sign. And I was trying to solve some of that problem, right? To Jackie's point, being a industry specialist and who could also provide legal specialty for that industry so that I had deep understanding of your transactions, of your business models, but also of the law that you needed to then overlay on top of that. But in addition to all of that, I think it comes down to, now that I've been in this seat for a while and I see it from the other side, right? I think that the client is just given very limited education about the different types of lawyers that are out there, what they can actually do for you. And so the expectations that they bring versus the expectations, quite frankly, the lawyer has when you are starting an engagement are very rarely, the time is rarely spent to truly vet that those are aligned because, yeah, you need a specialist. But sometimes I find in my practice, half of my clients, I would guess, come to me because of my IP / specifically technology industry or product driven experience. And so they initially come to me with an IP related question, a licensing question, a commercialization question, and that's all they really want. But then very quickly, we discover that all of the other aspects of their business that an outside general counsel can provide maybe are even more of what I end up doing for them over time than what they initially came for me as a specialist in for. And so I think we have to put it on the lawyers that we don't do a great job of making sure that our clients understand what we really can do. And that's also outcomes, to Jackie's point, I think people expect that by hiring a lawyer and making that investment, there's almost, there should be almost like a guarantee and an outcome that's better than what they could have had on their own. And in many cases, that is the case. But, what is that spectrum of possibility? And then also, what is just down to communication and working styles, like every other human being, your lawyer is a part of your team. It's like hiring a co-founder. It's like, and if you don't think of it that way, if you think of your lawyer as just sort of another vendor that you're plugging in and out, you're probably not getting the most value out of them, but you could be. It's an inefficient relationship. But also, you're much more likely to have that feeling of dissatisfaction because you're not giving them as much information. They're not giving you as much. And if your communication styles aren't aligned, if what you want delivered to you is not expressed clearly, and then if they don't express to you how they're going to deliver the work so that it's most useful to you, I think you're going to be pretty unhappy, or at least, not thrilled.
And I just have a quick follow-up to what Juliana said. The question is your lawyer solving a problem, or is this lawyer solving your problems? And a lot of lawyers like to solve problems and get their joy, get their pay for solving problems, but they may have very little to do with what your real problems are as a business.
That's an excellent point. I think Jackie, by the way, I mean, giving her a shout out. I love sharing this time with her because I refer a lot of clients to her because I know that she's not just going to solve a patent problem, but the client specific one. And that is a huge distinction. And so I'm a better lawyer to my client. And they're happier with me when I refer them to someone like Jackie. And I had the gumption to do that as well. So
right back at you.
So Juliana, you mentioned something in passing. I actually think warrants a little bit of expansion. So if you don't mind, I'd like to pause a beat on that, and I'd love Jackie to comment as well. You talked about a scenario under which maybe an attorney is brought into the team for an initial task, right? And then that task develops into a relationship, and therefore the spectrum of problems that the attorney is going to address will become broader and the relationship will become deeper, right? And it strikes me that maybe that is perhaps an example of best practices of how to hire an attorney, to try to figure out a model of instead of just sort of like a mail order bride kind of thing where you're getting married sight unseen, right? Can you have a date or two to see if you actually like each other before you really kind of dive in and commit to a massive relationship? Does that make any sense?
It does. And that is almost always the way it starts. You know, I can't, maybe 2 clients, 3 who come to me and said, you're going to be our outside general counsel immediately, and you're going to handle everything. It's usually a discrete project. Now, the reason why I think that is partly fee fear. And that's a whole nother reason, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room for why people are unhappy with their lawyers. And we definitely need to talk about that some more. But yeah, and I think in those cases where it was the case, it was because also critically, I was referred, or in effect, they knew that my work quality and my work product was going to be good, and they had their expectations set as far as how that would be delivered from another attorney or another professional who could speak to that. Or they actually observed my work product because they saw me in action in a different context, either through mentoring at a university or teaching at a university, collaborating with someone else's project where I wasn't their counsel, and then they wanted me as their counsel. And so, again, you know, when we live in this world where it's very difficult to evaluate lawyers or even just assemble the collection of those who are available in a specialty so that you can begin to search them properly, I think it's really important that you look for folks who you can observe their skill, their expectation of how they want to work, how you want to work with them, and their working style, you know, how they deliver work and how they communicate ahead of time if possible. And I know most of the time you have an urgent fire, and now we've actually got to hire a lawyer. And so there's a rush and you don't have that. And so in that case, even more, I would say, if it's an attorney who's referred by another attorney, that's a very good sign, in my opinion.
And what I like to say is it's just as important for me to love my clients. And I've spent a lot of time, and I've actually worked very hard at making sure that the folks who are going to work with me it's going to be a good fit. Because if it's not a good fit, they're not going to be happy, and I'm not going to be happy. So I've created an intake system where I get to know people. I make sure that they're the right people for my practice, because I have a very bespoke, different type of practice. But the reason I learned that is through real, not very comfortable experiences. I woke up as an equity partner in a law firm where I was being paid hundreds of dollars an hour, and more money than I've ever made, in more than 15 years ago when I left that position. And I woke up one day and I said, I have nothing in common with my clients. We don't really click. And yet they were paying me ridiculous amounts of money, and neither of us liked each other. And that's no shade on them. That's no shade on me, but it was not a good fit, from that standpoint. And yet I didn't, because I had was working at a law firm with massive overhead, associates reporting to me, all the stuff that goes along with that. I didn't have my business model did not allow me to say, you know what, you need to go somewhere else because this is not a good fit. And, that creates unhappy clients, unhappy lawyers, and it becomes a cycle that's really, really difficult to extricate yourself from.
So I want to stick on that point too, because I think that's really important. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I can say as a matter of my practice, I do make clients in a way sell themselves to me. I make them jump through hoops to make sure that I think it's a good fit. It's sort of a life's too short thing. And, I also don't want to have a bad outcome because it was just a bad fit. I don't want that on my record, basically. Right. And I suspect that both of you do the same thing in some fashion or another. And to somebody listening now, because going back to the topic, how do you choose a lawyer? Is it a red flag if I'm a client and I call an attorney up and I say, hey, I need this done, they say, okay, I'll send you an engaged letter, right? No conversation, no hoops to jump through, no pre-qualification, not even any hint of a client acceptance process if you're a larger firm. Is that in itself a red flag? Like, geez, really?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I'm going to go back and say it again because I think it's worth repeating. It's like hiring a co-founder. It's like hiring another operator, C-suite operator of your company. And so to Jackie's point, yeah, you got to get along. And in her case, love her clients, which is why I love referring mine to her. But also, you're going to be in the trenches. By the way, my clients, and I joke that when they hire me, they expect me not only to live a long time, but to outlive them, because they don't want to have to go find another lawyer if I die before them. So I've got to be a lawyer forever, and I've got to do it longer than they're going to be alive. And so, as a result, like, this is a long-term relationship. I have many clients now that has exits from companies. Some had companies that didn't work out. And I will stick with those founders in different contexts for years and years and years. And so is that worth an extra hour, an extra 30 minutes of discussion up front? I think so. I don't know about you. I wouldn't want to get married to somebody that I hadn't, going back to your analogy, Mike, that I hadn't had at least a 30-minute worthy conversation. When you don't do that, both sides are treating this like a purely transactional relationship. And it's just, that is the fiction. This is a deep relationship over time.
So to Juliana's point, I tell clients, and any potential new client that contacts me, I make sure that in our initial call, I say, you know what, you're not going to hear this from any other lawyer I know, maybe Juliana, because I haven't done an intake with her, but I say, I will always tell you the truth, even though you don't want to hear the truth. And I will always treat your money like it's my money. Okay. And if that's not something you want, if you want somebody to say yes to you all the time, somebody who makes you comfortable, which is what I was required to do when I was an equity partner in a law firm. I couldn't make my clients uncomfortable because, oh my gosh, if they're uncomfortable, if I cause them any kind of like, no, well, I think maybe we should try something different, they might go down the street to another expensive law firm because in actuality, there was really no competitive differentiation between what I was doing and any number of expensive law firms that also existed in the city. If not, I have a federal practice. I'm a patent lawyer, but throughout the country.
So let me change gears here. If you look at most law firm websites and the bios, this is changing a little bit, I think, to be fair, but it hasn't changed enough in my view. An attorney's academic credentials are very much front and center. And I'd like to get both of your viewpoints. How important should the brand name of the school, we don't know if you never know if that person graduated top or bottom of their class, but how much should the name of the school matter in terms of selecting who an attorney is going to be?
You're asking somebody who went to a 4th-tier law school that in another city that had the same name of a law school here in Atlanta that wasn't accredited. My resume went into the circular file of every law firm that I applied to, and I was at the top of my class. I had won all kinds of awards or whatever. So, in bottom line, I went to a really good school for where I lived in Chicago. Right, everybody knew my law, but nobody knew it outside. I was fortunate enough to get brought into a very prestigious law firm, working with a very, very prestigious lawyer, litigator at the time, and everything's history in that regard. But I can say that some of the least talented lawyers I have ever worked with and worked directly with went to some of the best law schools, unquestionably. So, but how do you know that from the outside? It's at the end of the day, where you went to school often is an infinity game, right? At least there's some perspectives, there's some assumption that somebody else has done the filtering, and you have to worry about fewer things. But that requires you to have absolute confidence that the filtering was done correctly, and that's irrational if you ask me.
Thank you for saying that, Jackie. 100%. Well, it's a filter, but is that filter relevant to why you're hiring the attorney? So I went to I'll say an upper mid-tier law school, University of Maryland School of Law, and I went to an Ivy League undergrad, and neither of those degrees are framed on my wall in my office, because that's how much I think they matter to my practice of law, by the way. But I do agree that they do create an efficiency and a filter for those who need to quickly sort through 1,000 lawyers, and it matters to. And why would that matter? If you are in the middle of a high stakes federal appeal, and the people who are going to determine the outcome of your issue, your problem, are people who care about that, it could be a useful tool to consider putting in the quiver, or a useful arrow to put in the quiver, to have an attorney who's got a storied degree or background. If you need someone to write your IP commercialization agreement for a specific type of software, I think a much better filter is whether that person understands that software or software in general, or commercialization of software in the world, or commercialization at all, or in the jurisdictions where you're looking at, or if they've ever had to think about the commercialization of a patent in Jackie's case and how that actually plays into your business plan. And so I think it is perfectly relevant and reasonable if you're looking to use the appellate system to change the law for your industry, to try to get somebody who's got the credentials that a federal judge would appreciate, who's going to help adjudicate and determine the outcome of your appeal. But in most other cases, I think industry experience, I think the ability to mesh with you and your perspective as far as how legal services are going to be prioritized and delivered, communicates well with you, has good rapport, and has just the raw skill to do the work is much more important.
And I would say from the standpoint of a business, an entrepreneur that needs real world guidance in a way that somebody who's a large corporation may not need that kind of guidance, you're much more likely to find somebody with real world experience that went to a lower tier, quote unquote, lower tier law school than went to one of the Ivies. That may have had a job before, may have gone to school at night, because you're not going to get that kind of somebody who went to GSU versus here in Atlanta, if somebody went to Georgia State at night versus somebody who went to Emory, and you want them to give you practical advice. And the reason why they went to GSU at Georgia State at night was because they were working in a laboratory during the day to feed their family. That's in the patent world. That's a big deal, right? Somebody who's actually got practical science experience. So their law degree isn't as quote unquote, premier as going to Emory, but the reasons they went to the lower tier school were indicative of their expertise as you need in context.
So Juliana alluded to an image which I wanted to touch upon. So it's great you're basically doing my job for me. And that is starting off with a list of 1,000 lawyers, right? And one way one might get a list of 1,000 lawyers might be to look at the Martindale Hubble website, ratings, that sort of thing. And I assume that's still a thing. I haven't looked. I actually didn't look for this podcast, but I suspect it's still out there. So, from people who are industry insiders, definitionally industry insiders, how useful are those?
How many referrals have you gotten from those kind of sources, Jackie? I don't. For a lot of them are business models of the folks that do the books, right? It used to, I was a super lawyer one year. I had no clue why I was named a super lawyer, but they sent me a solicitation, send us X number of dollars, so you can have your pretty picture in the magazine that comes out every year.
So I want to come back to that.
There's some criteria for reaching that point, but I actually don't know what it is now. On my top IP, global IP strategists or whatever, they do solicit an advertisement from me every year for several $1,000s. I have never advertised, and that has not affected my ability to be named every year. So it's kind of a black box as far as I understand.
I would say I have the same experience. Maybe I get like a spam email here, and I'm not sure if it's a spam email with a referral from some of these places. But I honestly, that is not any part of my marketing or my business development pipeline at all. And so if I was out in the world trying to find a lawyer that's either the Jackie or the Juliana or someone similar who I felt like would be a good fit, and I could vet they were quality, I think it's kind of logical to go to your industry events, you could go to the legal committee or related industry events, but those are kind of adjacent. Those tend to be both people who care a lot about affecting legal protocol for your industry or are marketing themselves to other lawyers. But if you go to the actual industry events or blogs and see which lawyers are actually engaged with your industry and are present in it and interacting with it and accepted and embraced by it, I think you can get your 100-person list or even a 5-person list, and that 5-person list is going to probably be a lot more representative of who is doing the real work related to what you need done than the opposite. If you just go to a podcast digest and put in patent law, Georgia, Jackie Hutter's podcast is going to come up, and you'll be able to listen to her work product in effect by listening to her talk about the specific issues that you care about. I think it's a much better way to create a list. We get the neighborhood listserv like so many of us have these days, and people ask, I need an estate lawyer, who would you hire? I'm pretty sure that when I, as somebody who the neighbors know as a senior lawyer, says, yeah, I have used this person, and even though I'm not an estate lawyer, I like what they do. Okay, I know nothing about estates and trust law, but I know somebody who's handling my stuff, my things that are important to me, and I feel they're doing a good job. The likelihood that they're going to also do a good job for you is probably better. Not always the case, but I at least know who I would and wouldn't recommend, because when I recommend somebody, my reputation is on the line. I consider my reputation to be on the line. Even though I may not, I don't make any money from that, but it's still, people rely on me for my expertise. And it's meaningful to me. So I would ask people who are in the business, who have gone farther along than you and maybe had an exit or maybe had a situation and they were happy with the result. And, Mike, you always like to say, what result are you, what business result are you seeking to obtain from whatever decision you're making? And so look around for other people who have been through the entire process and see what their result was and whether or not they were happy with that. Can we highlight that, what Jackie just said in particular? The part about it's her reputation on the line. Mike, you said the same thing about taking in a client and that you want it to be a good relationship because, quite frankly, it's going to hurt your reputation if it goes sideways. This is so important. It's not just, reinforcing existing networks or cronyism to talk to other lawyers or your accountants or your wealth managers or your community entity or industry group leaders about who they like, because they have that real world experience and it's their reputation on the line if they refer you to somebody who you're going to have a bad experience with. And oh, by the way, for Jackie and I, under certain jurisdiction interpretations of our ethical rules under the bar, when we refer someone to another service provider, particularly another lawyer, in some cases, we can be liable for malpractice performed by that secondary attorney. Now, not in all cases, but in some cases you can. So there's that thin risk added on top of our reputational concern that all lawyers feel every time we make a referral to any other third-party service provider for our clients. And that is, I don't know about you, I take that very seriously because you can't control that other person's action. So you've got to know from experience they're going to do a good job.
I'm always very careful also telling somebody how I know somebody, right? I have worked with this person, or I have actual knowledge of the work they've done, or I met them. They seem like they know how to do it, but I'm not gonna necessarily push into any real degree of knowledge about how whether I know that they're trustworthy or not. And maybe that comes from the fact where I grew up, right? I'm from Miami back in the bad old days, and everybody wanted to steal your money. Everybody wanted to be so what it was, or do something else that was not good, because it's Miami. Watch Miami Vice. It was not that much. It was actually worse than Miami Vice. It wasn't as pretty, but in any event, that you created your own networks, and those weren't who you went to church with or who you went to school with or anything, because you couldn't trust anybody in an environment like that unless you really knew them. And so we created these very diverse networks of people, and the focal point of creating those networks was because knew that they were trustworthy. And the reason they were part of your network is because they had been vetted by somebody else you trusted. And I treat every referral I have today like that. And if I cannot attest to that, I'm absolutely honest and straightforward about that.
So you touched on something that I need to make sure that I cover today. It'd be negligence for me as a podcaster if I don't. And I'm probably going to put you ladies in the hot seat, but I know you can handle it. What is a Georgia super lawyer? What does that mean? If I'm a client and I see that somebody's a Georgia super lawyer or super lawyer someplace in their bio, it's in there, they've shouted out on LinkedIn. I mean, does that say, man, I got to hire that person? They're a Georgia super. Do they have a cape? I mean, what's their...
This is a much funnier question than it was a year ago, because there's now a guy who's got a set of billboards. Have you seen these, Juliana? At least they're up on 85 on my way. Next time you're going to go down the highway from your house, look at this. I'm sorry, we're going sideways. There's a bunch of billboards by a lawyer who says he is thesuperlawyer.com, which is not a super lawyer TM. Okay, because a super lawyer is a trademark of the company that whoever. So this guy, it's like, what? How could he be the super lawyer, thesuperlawyer.com, but he's not a super lawyer TM? So that is that's indicative of the fact. It's like, you don't know, I don't know, who knows, right? It sounds like a trademark infringement suit to me. But bottom line is, like I had alluded to before, I was a super lawyer. I have lots of friends who are super lawyers. Yeah, there's some filtering mechanism that they get you. Juliana, you have more information on that?
Yeah. So our firm looked into it again, because there was our women's law group said we should make sure that the women and the folks who are represented through the diversity committee are also participating in whatever it needs to be done to ensure that they can be nominated if their own networks are not deep enough to nominate them. And so we looked into it. And for super lawyers, unlike some others, you do have to create an account to nominate somebody so that you can get into their marketing pipeline as a lawyer. And it is only other lawyers nominate lawyers. You have to have multiple other lawyers nominate you, and they can't be from your firm. Maybe one or two, but you can't. And as a nominator, you can't just nominate everyone in your firm. You have, for every person that you want to nominate in your firm, you have to nominate either one or two or three other lawyers. And so what is your motivation? I mean, there isn't a lot of disincentive, again, to not just nominate a bunch of other people, except for the fact that, again, if you do so, you're kind of on the record in some level, and potentially there's some liability there. But since this is through a pipeline and it's not directly referring to a client, that's less of a risk. I would say there are some where it definitely feels much more pay to play. Super Lawyers does, in fact, have a process where a certain number of other lawyers, more than two, have to nominate you, and they can't be from your firm. So there's, less of an incentive to just nominate your own team. And so that is not a perfect filter. it's better. It is a filter, I think. I think it has some value because, again, I just have a feeling from my experience that our jobs are hard. It's very easy to make mistakes in a job that requires as a baseline you be perfect. Because think about it. If we aren't perfect, that could lead to very bad outcomes for our client. And so almost every lawyer could wince about thinking about moments in life and in practice where they haven't been perfect. And often that happens in the context of performing in front of another lawyer who observed you being imperfect. And so to get another lawyer to want to say, yeah, this person's super. And oh, by the way, lawyers are very competitive. I think actually there's some value to that. But beyond that, I think that it is not, to Mike's point, it is not a deep filter. It is a filter.
So I don't have a marketing budget, and I don't have any, I haven't been nominated for being a super lawyer since I was in a law firm. And the referrals that I get typically are from my own clients who are happy with what I do. So presumably they think I'm a super lawyer, but it's not in the context of some magazine that gets floated and it becomes marketing collateral that's distributed, in all kinds of, press releases and stuff every year. But more power to anybody who's named a super lawyer. I have dear friends who were super lawyers. No shade on them. But if I was choosing a lawyer, it wouldn't be because they were a super lawyer.
That might be a great filter question when you're interviewing a lawyer, going to some of your, how do we workshop your real question here, Mike? One of the questions that you could ask is, what percentage of your existing clients are referrals from your other clients?
Good question.
And just, even if they're a young lawyer and they just haven't had enough time to have it be that high of a percentage, it would be very informative for me as a potential client to hear that answer and how they address it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question that probably has different degrees of relevance depending on what area of law, right? It's probably okay if you're seeking a personal injury attorney, it may be okay that you saw them on the side of a bus, right? Because it's just the nature of that business, or a DUI kind of thing. I know that's not your world, but you're right. It does sound to me intuitive that a very fair question to ask is, where do most of your referrals come from?
So, Mike, you brought up the bus side, and this is something that's very passionate about this, and I tend to lob a lot of criticisms to my fellow attorneys at times, as you think. If, and this is not just buses, this is not just billboards, but this is any swag that you get. If your potential lawyer takes you to lunch and gives you some swag and takes you to baseball games or whatever, and you're not a real client who's delivering revenue to them now, recognize those billboards don't pay for themselves. That swag doesn't pay for themselves, right? So it's a loss leader for them where they're going to get that money back somehow, whether they're going to beat it out of your hide or out of every client's a collective hide. But, from my perspective, anytime I see a law firm that is spending huge budgets on marketing in a way that does not result in substantive content for a client that lets them learn something so that they can to drive better decisions, that's like a television commercial watching a primetime TV show.
Is it fair for a client to ask an attorney for specific references? Somebody they could call and ask a client or previous client how happy they were with their work?
Absolutely. Yes. And a couple of years ago, there's a very famous attorney, of course I won't say their name, who once a contact of mine asked that attorney for referrals. They were in the startup world and wanted to see whether they were a good patent expert, because they're at all the startup shows, right? They're everywhere. So, it's like you would think that this would be the person that you would hire to do your startup patent work for you. Very senior person in town. And this patent person told my contact that it would be impossible to give the names of other clients that they had worked for, because that would be a violation of attorney-client privilege. And I had never heard anything like that before. And I said, well, if they don't want to introduce you to their existing clients and to satisfy clients, you by then can take a negative inference on that and assume that there are none.
Oh, okay. Right? I'm going to weigh in on that. So I agree with everything Jackie said up to the very last inference there being such a broad brush. There are certain types of practice areas where the client that might be related to what you're doing, in fact, might be needing some confidentiality because there's an active litigation matter, and just the fact that they've hired this attorney, this fancy, well-known attorney, could be very bad for their business.
But in the patent world, your name is public record on the patent, so that's.
Yeah, so I just didn't want that to be painted across all law, but not every single client. If they only have 3 clients or 4 in your industry, and they're all new, and they're all for whatever, and it's a litigations, attorney and a litigator, and so you need a reference. They should be able to give you some client reference, or multiple, even if they can't give you one that might be directly related to your industry right now. And then you just also, it's information. You now know. Breaking into your industry is a more recent experience for that attorney, because they just don't have any that aren't currently in active litigation right now, and that usually means they've only had that kind of client for the last 2.5 years max. So there are other attorneys that might have more experience in your industry. Maybe you should look around.
We are talking with Jackie Hutter and Juliana Neelbauer, and the topic is, how do I choose a lawyer? Is there any kind of, in the financial world, there's often public record when people sort of have marks against them, whether it's an official censure by an accrediting organization or a complaint filed with a regulatory agency. Is there anything similar that pertains to the legal profession where I could do my own background check and see if there have been any complaints filed, say, with the Bar Association, or if there's been a censure or anything, just to at least do that basic level of due diligence?
Yes. In fact, unlike other industries, there's at least 3 places that you can search to see if your attorney has been subject to an unhappy client outcome. One of them is the court system itself, where they could file a malpractice claim against the attorney. Another one is a grievance proceeding with the Bar Association. And if you're not sure how to search for that, you can even call the Bar Association, and they have clerks that will help you look that up. That's a second resource for that. And then the bar one for the grievance is nice, because even if it doesn't rise to a level where the client can afford to file a claim in court against their attorney, or it doesn't rise to a level where they could show damages easily, where they could file a claim in court, if they still have a legitimate ethical grievance with their attorney, they can file a grievance with the Bar Association. And then third is the Better Business Bureau. I mean, again, this is where I come back to, we are vendors, we're partners in your business, but, we are running our own operations here. And so you could certainly have consumers file unhappinesses with the Better Business Bureau too.
Practically speaking,
others?
Yeah, but practically speaking, however, and I have recent experience on this, we had a outside counsel for two of my clients. One's an entrepreneur, small business, and another one is a fairly large, company, well-known company that, and outside counsel was doing work for us under my management. And it turns out, who knows? Maybe he has a health issue. Maybe he has a drinking problem. Who knows? But we found out, because for a lot of lawyers, especially when you have time-dependent things like litigation or you have dates, you expect your lawyer to report stuff to you and to give you the information and of course respond, but also respond in a timely manner. And in this case, we found out, just because no news was not good news in this case. And what ended up happening is there was a clear pattern in retrospect that this lawyer was not maintaining ethical standards. It was likely malpractice, but for both of these clients, the decision was to just let's just find somebody else and move on and mitigate, mitigate the damage here, because we found it, because I was managing things. We found it before there was real damage, but what the effect was just basically let this guy off because he did things. It didn't make sense for us to make a complaint, because there really was no damage. because we were able to stop that damage. But this guy is just going to go ahead and continue to what other health problem he has, or drinking problem, or whatever reason he's not maintaining ethical standards. And is he the equivalent of letting somebody drive a car without his faculties? Maybe. But he's not going to hit my client. He's not going to hit me anymore. It's an awful thing. What do you do, right? It's so relatively speaking, just like with medical malpractice, relatively speaking, there's very few complaints made when there should be.
Although there are kind of legal industry gossip sources too that you could go to. Some of them are not very journalistic at all, and potentially are defamatory. Others are maybe a little bit more balanced, like Above the Law, which, by the way, if you search for Jackie on Above the Law, all you'll find is positive stuff about her. So
wait, am I on Above the Law? I didn't know I'm on Above.
You are. You're an IP deal maker, listed on there in an article for winning an award as an IP deal maker at the IP Deal Makers Forum. So,
that was a trivia contest.
Yeah, but you're still you get a plug on there. So, if you want to kind of like see what might not have been filed, but is sort of like gossip, it's usually about a firm, not necessarily a specific attorney, unless a specific attorney does something very untoward. But that is another source you could go to. And Law 360 covers the industry, but is it more, I would say, always positive generally, and not necessarily so much gossip. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, again, dating and hiring anybody in your C-suite. It's not always easy to know. Unless, again, you've had this referred to you by one or more people in the field or people in your industry. And this is why I go back to, like, watch this person in action as much as you can, hear them in action, read them in action as much as you can.
We're running over time here, but if you can bear with me, I have a couple more questions I'd love to get through because I think they're important. And one of them is, how would you advise somebody who's retaining counsel, but there's a disconnect between either the reputation or just their general feeling between an attorney and the firm for whom they work, right? Could be a situation, maybe you like the attorney, but maybe you don't love the firm so much, or maybe it's the opposite, right? Maybe it's you don't love the attorney, but the firm has a reputation of being the, quote, best firm in town, capital letters TM. How do you try to reconcile those things? Do you run screaming if those two things are not aligned? You just sort of shuffle the deck and start over? Do you prioritize one or the other? How do you address that mentally?
Again, this relationship is really between you and the attorney for the long term, in my experience. The firm can make that relationship more or less fun based upon administratively, like how easy they make it to work with that attorney, or difficult. If that attorney is not empowered, unfortunately, by their colleagues that they might work for to work directly with you, and their colleagues are going to insert themselves in your work, and you don't like those colleagues, you as a client have a lot of power to request who you want to work with and make that demand and say, I only want to work with so-and-so, or not that person. And I had a client whose business model was in an ESG space, and she was a female founder who was helping to fund other female founders. So shout out to Enrich Her and Dr. Roshana Novelis for what she has done and her success. And I've had clients in that space who come to me like her, or others who have said, I really want all of the attorneys who work on my project to be to meet diversity standards of the Mansfield requirements, which is a diversity standard, or to represent my company. And so in some cases I'll ask, I want only female attorneys, or I only want people who represent that on my case. And in some cases, you can have quite a bit of power to get that outcome if the firm is willing to accommodate that, and if it's a legal request for you to make.
And then also, if you've been assigned an attorney that you just don't feel is the right fit for you, and if you like the managing attorney, I have no qualms with telling my primary IP outside LP counsel, it's like, no, I don't want that person working on my stuff. or I just did not feel that they really, were passionate about, they didn't get me, that kind of stuff. And that's not happening anymore. And we need to find somebody else.
And in fact, the bar rules make it very difficult, if not impossible, for a firm to place a non-compete so that attorney can't work with a specific client, because it is so important in our judicial system and our justice system for the client to have that choice of who is going to represent them. And so, to Jackie's point, you have the right to ask for counsel that you request and need and want. And if you don't feel like you've got good representation, you have the right to request representation that you want.
So, ladies, we're past sort of out of time, but I know we didn't get to all the questions that I wanted to, and there are probably other questions that we covered, but maybe a listener would like to go into more depth, or hey, maybe somebody who's listening to this wants to hire one or both of you guys. Can they contact you for more information? And if so, what's the best way to do that?
Well, for me, I'm at Jackie Hutter Gmail. And I also have a podcast, Winning with Patents and IP, that's now entering its second season. And I write a lot on LinkedIn. So look for me on LinkedIn. And if I sound like somebody you think might be fun and create value for you to work with, I'd love to hear from you.
Similar to Jackie, I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I've getting off of most of the Facebook products and may wind down my Instagram presence soon. But for the time being, I'm cemented there. So you certainly can reach out to me there. Neelbauer J, that last name is so long. You certainly are welcome to look at the show notes to get that email address. But Neelbauer J at deflaw.com is my email address. And I'm certainly always interested to talk to new potential clients, especially those that have heard me or seen me speak or write. And so, seeing that work product, if this feels like a good communication style, I'm very interested in speaking with you.
That's going to wrap it up for today's program. I'd like to thank Jackie Hutter and Juliana Neelbauer so much for sharing their expertise with us. We will be exploring a new topic each week, so please tune in so that when you're faced with your next business decision, you have clear vision when making it. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider leaving a review with your favorite podcast aggregator. It helps people find us so that we can help them. If you'd like to engage with me on social media with my chart of the day and other content, I'm on LinkedIn as myself and at Unblakeable on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Instagram. Once again, this is Mike Blake. Our sponsor is Brady Ware & Company, and this has been the Decision Vision Podcast.